Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're peeling back the layers on a really profound historical question. The historicity of Prophet Muhammad.
It's a big one.
It is. And it's a tricky conversation, definitely requires a specific approach. We really need to separate two, distinct concepts. There's the historical figure, the man who lived, who led this huge movement, had an immense political impact back in the 7th century.
Right, the leader.
And then there's the theological figure, the prophet, the receiver of divine revelation. We have to focus strictly on the first one, using, standard historical methods, source criticism.
Absolutely. That separation is crucial. It's standard practice for any academic look at figures like this. So our mission today really is to walk you through the evidence.
Okay.
We'll lay out the overwhelming consensus among professional historians. Then we'll look at the challenges, the claims from that small fringe of skeptics.
The mythicists.
Exactly. And then we get to the specific, powerful, external evidence texts, archaeology that historians actually rely on, the stuff that really anchors his existence.
Okay, let's start there then. The consensus. If you're a university history department today, what is the standard view? Across the board, secular religious scholars.
Well, the consensus is, frankly, solid. It's considered settled. A man named Muhammad ibn Abdullah was a real historical person operating in 7th century Arabia.
Settled.
Yeah, settled in the sense that professional historians, secular, Christian, Jewish, Muslim scholars working with the primary sources, they all pretty much agree on this basic historical fact. His existence isn't really the debate.
Okay, and methodologically speaking,
Yeah.
are we using like a special religious founder lens here?
Right.
Or is it the same standard applied to, say, Julius Caesar?
No, not at all. And that's really important. Historians approach Muhammad's existence just like any other major ancient figure. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, good comparisons.
Right.
We don't seriously debate if Caesar existed, do we? No. We debate the details, his motives, the accuracy of Plutarch, how much was propaganda. It's the same for Muhammad. The existence itself isn't the focus of academic debate.
So, the scholarly arguments aren't about if he was real, but more about how we reconstruct his life, how we separate the political leader from the maybe later layers of theological claims that built up.
Precisely. It's all about the details, the interpretation of the details, but the core fact.
Yeah.
The historical man who started it all, that's not really up for grabs in serious academic circles.
But okay, if the consensus is that strong, why do we hear this idea, maybe online or in certain discussions, that he might have been, made up, invented?
Right. That's where we get into what's called Muhammad mythicism. And we need to be clear, this is a fringe hypothesis.
Fringe meaning not accepted by most historians.
Definitely not. It's not supported by the vast majority of professional historians, including secular ones or those who don't personally believe. This small group suggests the figure was essentially fabricated later. Maybe late 7th, maybe early 8th century. The idea is the expanding Arab empire needed, sort of, a founding prophet figure, a unifying story after the fact.
Okay. And their arguments, they must have some basis, right? Especially you only look at the Islamic sources themselves. What are the gaps or the silences they point to?
They do raise questions that deserve addressing, particularly about source dating. Their main point often leans on the timing of the biographies.
The Sirah.
Exactly. The first complete biography, the Sirat Rasul Allah by Ibn Ishaq. Well, it was written down over a century after Muhammad's traditional death date, around 632 CE.
Not much over a century.
About 120 years. And the big collections of hadith, the sayings and actions attributed to him, they're even later. Often 200 years or more.
Wow, okay, 120 years. That's like trying to write the definitive biography of, say, Abraham Lincoln today, using only sources written in the 1980s. That is a significant gap.
It is, and the skeptics argue quite reasonably that this gap allows plenty of time for myths, legends, hagiography to develop and solidify around maybe a symbolic figure or even a completely invented one. It's a fair question. Where are the contemporary, detailed accounts of his life from within the tradition?
What else do the mythicists point to? Any other pillars to their argument?
Yeah, they usually bring up two other things. First, archaeology, specifically concerning Mecca.
Right.
They claim there's a lack of really significant 7th century archaeological evidence proving Mecca was the major international trade hub that the later biographies describe.
The idea being, if it was such a crucial city, we should find more stuff.
Kind of. If the whole movement started in this bustling cosmopolitan center, shouldn't the ground yield more proof from that specific time? That's the argument.
And the third point?
Yeah.
You mentioned early state documents.
Right, the early coinage and inscriptions. If this prophet figure inspired a massive conquest that reshaped the Middle East, you'd expect his name and message to be stamped everywhere immediately, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you probably would.
But for the first few decades, it wasn't consistently there. The early Arab Empire coins, say from the 630s through the 670s, often just reused older Byzantine or Sasanian imagery, maybe with some modifications.
No explicit mention of Muhammad or Islam.
Not systematically, not right away. It really wasn't until the Caliph Abd al-Malik reformed the administration and coinage, decades later, around the 690s, that you start seeing purely Arabic coins with explicit Islamic phrases, like the Shahada.
So the skeptics use that delay.
They use that delay to argue that the religious ideology, the focus on Muhammad, was maybe layered onto what was initially just a political or tribal expansion, a later justification.
Okay, those are definitely serious points. They challenge historians to, show their work. But, and this seems like the big but, mainstream historians don't accept the mythicist view. Why not? What's the counter evidence?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. Mainstream historians reject mythicism largely because the external evidence for Muhammad is considered exceptionally strong, surprisingly strong.
External meaning, not from Muslim writers.
Exactly. Evidence from outside the Islamic tradition. And crucially, much of it is very early. To accept the mythicist idea, you essentially have to ignore or dismiss a whole set of consistent external documents that actually predate the proposed window for fabrication.
Documents written by people being conquered, you said?
Often, yes, or observers from neighboring cultures watching this incredible expansion unfold.
Okay, let's dive into those. The texts. Who is the absolute earliest non-Muslim source to actually name Muhammad? And how close are we talking to his traditional death date?
The earliest we know of right now comes from a Christian writer named Thomas the Presbyter. He was Syriac Christian, probably in Mesopotamia. He's writing around 640 CE.
640 CE. Wait, Muhammad's traditional death is C632? That's only 8 years later.
8 years. In ancient history terms, that's practically contemporary. It's potentially eyewitness level information, or at most, one step removed.
Incredible. What did Thomas write? What did he say?
He was basically chronicling the chaos of the Arab conquests, recording events. And in that context, he specifically mentions, let me get the phrasing right, the Arabs of Muhammad gathered at Gaza.
Gaza. A major Byzantine city at the time.
A very major administrative center. Thomas isn't writing theology here. He's recording a military and political event. The fact that he identifies the leader galvanizing these Arab forces by name Muhammad just 8 years into the conquest is, well, it's pretty decisive evidence that a specific known leader with that name existed and was central to the movement.
That's very powerful. But could Thomas have just heard a name? Maybe attributed the whole thing to some convenient figurehead.
It's a fair question to ask. But we don't just have Thomas. We have other sources popping up almost immediately. Look at the Doctrina Iacobi.
The Doctrina Iacobi, what's that?
It's a Greek text, an anti-Jewish polemic, written in Palestine, and its dating is somewhere between 634 and 640 CE.
So even closer, potentially, within 2 to 8 years of Muhammad's death.
Right in that immediate window. And what does it say? It records a dialogue, and one character, a Jew, reports on what's happening with the Arab conquests. He says something like, a false prophet has appeared among the Saracens.
False prophet. Okay, so definitely not a friendly source.
Exactly. And that hostility is part of what makes it historically valuable. An enemy or a rival religious group isn't going to invent your founder for you. They mention him because he's real and causing massive disruption. The core message is confirmed again. A figure claiming prophethood named Muhammad is leading the Arabs, confirmed immediately, externally, and by a hostile witness.
2 sources within the first decade. What about later? Do we get more detail?
We do. A bit later, around the 660s, we get an Armenian bishop named Sebeos.
Okay, 660s. That's about 30 years after 632. Still very early.
Still very much within living memory, or the memory of the next generation. And Sebeos gives us the first sort of continuous narrative about Muhammad from a non-Muslim perspective. He names him, spelling it Imet, or similar in Armenian, describes him as a merchant originally.
Which matches the traditional biography.
It does. And Sebeos explains his role in teaching monotheism and uniting the Arab tribes. So by the 660s, the basic biographical sketch, including his background and his core message, was clearly circulating widely throughout the regions the Arabs now controlled.
Wow. Okay, so the external texts seem really strong, really early. It paints a picture of this figure being known almost instantly. But you mentioned archaeology. For someone trying to grasp this, sometimes physical evidence is that aha moment. Where's the concrete proof that this wasn't all just invented 100 years down the line?
Right. And for that, the absolute undeniable smoking gun is the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem.
Okay, the Dome of the Rock, huge, famous structure. When was it built?
It was completed by the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik around 691-692 CE.
Okay, let's do the math again. 692. That's just 60 years after 632.
60 years. Think about that. We're talking about maybe 2 generations. The grandchildren of people who might have known Muhammad could easily still be alive and influential.
And this isn't some small inscription somewhere. This is
a massive, monumental, imperial statement built right in the heart of Jerusalem, the holy city for Jews and Christians, recently conquered territory. It's an assertion of power and faith.
Okay, so what does it say? What's the inscription?
The original mosaic inscription inside, parts of which are still there, is unambiguous. It contains Quranic verses and explicitly states, Muhammad is the messenger of God. Muhammad Rasul Allah. It asserts his prophethood, the core of the Islamic message.
So if the mythicists argue Muhammad was invented maybe 100 or 150 years later,
then you have to explain how, just 60 years after his supposed death, the ruling caliph builds one of the most magnificent structures of the age in a contested holy city dedicated explicitly to this supposedly not yet invented figure.
Yeah, that sounds implausible.
It's historically untenable. You can't erect a massive public monument to a figure you just made up while people who would have known the truth, or whose parents knew the truth, are still around. It kills the later fabrication theory right there.
That level of public, state-sponsored institutionalization just 60 years on? It feels definitive. It's not just stories being passed down, it's stone and gold.
Exactly. It's state architecture confirming his central importance. And it lines up perfectly with other things happening around the same time.
Like the coins you mentioned.
Right. Around the same time, Abd al-Malik builds the dome, the 690s. He also introduces those purely Arabic coins we talked about. And what's on them? The Shahada, the Declaration of Faith, which explicitly includes Muhammad's name.
So monumental architecture, standardized currency. It all points to his name and status being official doctrine by the 690s.
It shows a rapid state-level institutionalization built around him. You have the textual evidence from outsiders early on, and then within a couple of generations, you have the state itself monumentalizing him.
And then there are the Quran manuscripts themselves. How does their dating fit in?
That adds another layer. Radiocarbon dating of early Quranic fragments, like the famous Birmingham manuscript, has placed the parchment they were written on back to the late 6th or very early 7th century.
So potentially within the traditional lifetime of Muhammad or just after?
Exactly. While dating parchment isn't the same as dating the ink, it strongly supports the idea that the text of the Quran was being compiled and written down very early on, during or immediately after the period the tradition claims. It makes the idea that the entire religion, including its scripture, was invented a century or more later much, much harder to sustain.
Okay, so if we pull all these threads together, the early Christian chronicles, the hostile Jewish account, Sebeos' narrative, the Dome of the Rock, the coins, the early manuscript dating, what's the big takeaway here?
The takeaway for anyone trying to understand this historically is that the mythicist argument, while raising valid questions about internal source transmission, ultimately fails. It fails because sustaining it requires you to dismiss or ignore a really coherent, converging body of external, independent, and physically monumental evidence.
It just creates more problems than it solves, historically speaking.
Far more. The historical evidence strongly confirms that a real person named Muhammad was the founder, the catalyst behind this massive political and religious movement that became the Arab Empire and Islam, and associated with the origins of the Quran.
So the real work for historians isn't if he existed.
No, not at all.
It's how do we best reconstruct the details of his life? How do we navigate sources that inevitably mix, historical memory with theological interpretation and maybe later legendary elements?
That's precisely the ongoing work, sifting through the sources, applying critical methodology, trying to separate the probable 7th century core from the later layers of interpretation and hagiography that naturally develop around such a monumental figure. It's what historians do.
That distinction seems absolutely key. Historical existence, verified by evidence, prophethood, a matter of faith.
Perfectly put. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with, something provocative, perhaps.
Hi.
When you actually line up the evidence, the early external mentions, the monumental confirmations like the dome, The historical evidence for Muhammad's existence is arguably better and earlier than the evidence we have for quite a few other ancient figures whose existence we just take for granted.
Really? Like who?
Well, think about certain Roman emperors, various ancient philosophers. Often the contemporary evidence is patchier or comes much later or isn't as monumental, yet their existence isn't constantly questioned in the same way.
That's raised an interesting point, maybe about the different standards, perhaps unconscious ones, we apply when looking at religious founders versus purely political or military figures.
It's something to consider, isn't it? It highlights why critical source analysis is so vital, why we need to look at all the evidence. Reconstructing any life from antiquity is complex, but looking at someone like Muhammad, the evidence is actually quite robust, making the task difficult, yes, but incredibly fascinating.